Wow, gentlemen. So many comments. Thank you so much. I'll read them all. Story 1. He's dark, broody, and mysterious on the outside, but only the girl can make him feel emotions. Around her, he's always kind and gentle and shows how he truly feels, but he never overwhelms her with his feelings. All she has to do is listen to him one time, and suddenly he's already getting better. Stuff like that, usually. Also, obviously he's attractive, tall, strong, etc. Story 2. The lead male role in any Hallmark movie. You know, the handsome, fit, strong guy in flannel who lives in a small town, works with his hands, but is also very liberal, very smart, and worldly despite never leaving his hometown. Story 3. When the man has to be fixed. He is attractive and successful but broody, and there is a barrier that only the woman can get through. Suddenly, he is in love with her. Story 4. As a woman in a blue-collar field, most of the men I know joke around a lot. Get a few guys together, and they're gonna roast each other or whoever is walking past them. I rarely see this in movies, but in real life, it's a valid way to get to know the guys, and I love that about men. Story 5. In novels, there's often a fundamental lack of understanding regarding trauma. John has been on a campaign in the bloodiest war in history. He has witnessed atrocities and lost his wife, son, daughter, and hamster. He hasn't smiled in years and is just waiting to die. But then the female lead disagrees with him once or twice and suddenly he is healed. 2 chapters later, they spend their days laughing in the countryside. I swear a lot of lesser female authors don't even register men as characters. They're just vehicles to illustrate how singular and charming their protagonist is. Story 6. Effing Twilight. When the mother of my children was pregnant, Twilight was big, and she was super into it. She wanted us to read them together. Okay, sure, I like to read, and that sounds like a good bonding experience. The first one was okay, interesting concept and definitely a fantasy, but hey, we all have our thing. The third one is easily one of the worst novels I've ever read. One of the things that really stands out, though, is neither Edward nor Jacob are men. They don't act like men and they don't think like men. As a man, I found them annoyingly unrelatable as characters. If your male characters are just there to obsess over your female lead and hiss, spit, and growl at each other like cats, consider going a different direction. Story 7. 1. Angsty. 2. Falls hopelessly in love with a woman who has nothing going for her. 3. Doesn't think about, for example, the difference between sex and love while negotiating a relationship, that is, has sex instantly in love. If he does, it is a character flaw. 4. Reluctant to discuss feelings instead of describing them exhaustively in a single short word or phrase. For example, I'm upset that you did that. 5. Is effortlessly good at something. Men who write men put them in a position of responsibility that they are entirely unprepared for and at which they fail repeatedly. 6. Is entirely one-dimensionally bad at something. There are exceptions, and not all of these things necessarily make a character bad. Lois Bujold does most of these with her Miles Vorkosigan books, and Miles remains a well-written character. Mainly because she doesn't do number 5 constantly, that is, Miles crashes and burns pretty often. Story 8. When the 2 male characters dislike each other, but instead of fighting it out or avoiding each other, they snipe and undermine each other every chance they get. I am looking at you, J.K. Rowling, writing Harry and Draco like 2 schoolgirls rather than boys who would have had a fist fight in the first 2 weeks of school and gotten over it by the end of detention. Story 9. He always knows the exact right thing to say at the right time. He always has a smooth one-liner in his back pocket. He never misses a beat. He's always on during playful banter, and he's constantly spitting funny, witty, clever remarks. In reality, we stumble, we're looking for words. And sure, we may say clever and funny things in conversations, but we never have that superhuman level of banter like, for example, Ben Affleck with his love interest in Gone Baby Gone. When they first meet, that's so out of a movie, where every word is perfect, that it actually takes you out of the movie. Story 10. The ones where it's 1,000,000% creepy stalking that I'd get pepper sprayed at best, arrested at worst, for. But in this context it's definitely sexy, we swear. Story 11. He is so amazing that he could get any woman he wants, but he is suspiciously single until the main character arrives and wins him over by doing nothing and offering nothing in return. Story 12. I rarely read anything like that, but the main takeaway from what I encountered is that the attractive love interest somehow never has a life other than waiting for the generic protagonist girl whose thoughts he can read. It's like all the problems of how women approach dating put into novel form. She doesn't have to stand out or work on herself since he immediately thinks she's perfect as she comes. She doesn't have to communicate since he just knows. She doesn't have to do any romance on her part since he covers that role for both. She never has to work towards any life goals with him since he's already figured that out or has inherited wealth. Story 13. That we're just brooding, rutting beasts incapable of emotion, or as thick as mince living in our own bachelor filth at the mercy of the women's eye roll and men comment waiting to be trained. Story 14. One example I remember from a good writer, Deborah Magak, was her describing an older man in his 60s walking down the street. He was wistfully thinking that he didn't get any attention from the opposite sex anymore. No lingering looks or holding open doors. That's not really a male experience, even for good-looking men, and was very clearly a woman's thought. It was quite striking because the rest of the book was very good, so it really stuck out. Story 15. It's more about the female character. When the female is a clear self-insert type character, it's obvious who is writing it. A good example of this is Bella from Twilight or whatever her name is from 50 Shades. Completely mundane characters with no real aspirations or personalities. They just sort of exist to get scooped up by the male lead. Also, when you have a bad boy, attractive, rich, famous male character who chooses a completely mundane, stick-in-the-mud female character and suddenly becomes hopelessly in love with her, it's an obvious sign. Story 16. He's been with a different woman every week since he was 13, and this is somehow not a red flag. He effortlessly picks up on her merely thinking about flirtation correctly every single time. He barely feels emotion, if at all, like a robot. And for all the criticism male authors get about cliched descriptions, female authors are just as likely to portray male characters at a level of desire one step removed from a nuisance. Not saying men can't be desirous, but most aren't that desirous all the time. Story 17. What makes me roll my eyes the most in romance and smut books and films made by women are perfect men having a mindset of unattractive men. Let's look at that Massimo dude from 365 Days. Everyone got so up in arms about the whole kidnapping thing, but let's be honest, what did he kidnap her for? Basically, to say that for the next whole year, he's going to kiss her and try to win her over without expecting anything in return, not even intimacy. A hot, hypermasculine, filthy rich guy who, in reality, would probably have a roster of top-tier attractive people and wouldn't even want to hear about settling down with anybody, let alone a random snarky woman who looks worse than him, somehow acts like a needy, nerdy high schooler with no options. Story 18. When the male characters are overly emotional and continue to relate to people through their relationships with others, most guys just don't care about that stuff. We primarily relate and show emotions through actions. For example, if I love someone, I'll walk up to them and hug them. I'll also maybe pick up one of their favorite donuts on the way home. I rarely bare my soul in lovelorn soliloquy. Story 19. When he prepares to fight the heroine, she overpowers him with no real reason. She didn't punch him in the throat or stab him in the eye. She just trades blows with him until he gives up. Nope. Sorry. Story 20. Male characters are often depicted as simple. They lack complex motivations, emotions, or philosophies that influence or inspire their actions. Their backstory often features cliches that would require years of therapy to recover from, but somehow the main character is the perfect solution. The specificity of their appearance leads to assumptions about their personality. It's a cop-out to show who the character is in a natural way if the main character has them figured out just from their sleeves being rolled up. Story 21. Interest by author fiat. For example, the woman has no personality, does not have great dialogue, is not described as all that pretty, and there is nothing unique or remarkable about her in any way. Yet, there is something about her he seemed to find irresistible. Story 22. Finally, after reading romance all year, I think I am pretty qualified for this. The biggest mistake that many authors make when writing male main characters is that they don't have any flaws, both personality and physical ones. In my opinion, what makes Anna Huang and Lucy Score's fictional men so cringe, and Emily Henry and Ursula Vernon so awesome, is that you can tell which men are inspired by real, interesting people with depth and which are just the author's fantasy. Story 23. Whenever a male exists on both sides of a personality spectrum, like when a strong fighter also has a love of poetry and gardening, or when a man is born extremely rich but somehow remains perfectly humble, it just seems like wishful thinking. Story 24. It is usually not a particular character, but the story as a whole. The tell is that it usually follows typical feminist narratives. For the men in those stories, it is that they are incompetent, do not understand how awesome the woman is and try to hold her down. They will be mean towards her because she is a woman, or say something like, "Hey baby, want to show me a good time?" Think of that biker scene from Captain Marvel. Story 25. When the guy is super good looking and doing grand gestures for an average or below average girl. Twilight banked on this. Also, when men easily swallow their pride or open up emotionally. Story 26. When the security guards or henchmen easily lose a fight to a 100-pound woman. 95% of women could not win a fight against even one average guy, much less big security guards who are extremely fit, and taking on more than one at a time is especially incredulous. Story 27. The ones who are troubled, but she comes into his life and fixes him in short order. The really docile, sappy ones that grovel for her affection. Most of us aren't that desperate. Along those lines, overt displays of emotional vulnerability. Guys tend to be less straightforward about how they are feeling compared to women. It doesn't mean we don't know how we're feeling, and it doesn't mean we're ashamed. But, especially when it comes to women, and especially if it's a woman we like, we tend to play our cards closer to our chests. And, as a matter of fact, women often misinterpret a guy being upfront with his emotions from the get-go as a sign he's interested in her. It's absolutely the opposite. It means he sees you as a safe maternal figure, not as girlfriend material. I can't tell you how many movies I've seen where I see the guy behaving like a realistic male best friend and then somehow he and the girl fall in love. It doesn't happen that way. Story 28. When they think and act like women. The same way many female characters written by men are men with female traits, many male characters by women are women with muscles and beards. Story 29. It's actually very common for female writers to create poorly developed male characters, just as male writers often create poorly developed female characters. A lot of these characters are like dolls, handsome but completely empty inside. They have no interests other than the woman in the story and no personal life of their own. They may wear an eye patch for some reason, likely due to a piratical attraction. They are probably awfully mysterious and disappear in and out of her life for periods of time. Often, they are secretly wealthy and display traits of the dark triad. Somehow, he will also be extremely fit and muscular. Even though his profession is an animal veterinarian or an accountant, he's probably also suffering from a mysterious disease that she finds a way to cure. She is the only woman he has ever loved and ever will love. But they cannot be together for some mysterious reason. There's always mystery involved. For some mysterious reason, women seem to be fascinated by mystery. Story 30. When he puts up with too much nonsense from girls and treats their opinions as gospel, it shows a dramatic lack of self in the character. Yet somehow he'll also be competent. No, you can't achieve competency in anything without developing and defending your own ways to approach the world. Here's another way to think about the problem. You can easily write about a rocket punch in a story about fighting robots, but actually building that in real life is hard. You have to make me believe the people in the story are capable of building something like that. I'm not going to accept a hippie commune that doesn't believe in technology can do it unless it's a ridiculous parody. It's just not something that can be taken seriously. Story 31. The biggest issue is when a man is wealthy and attractive, and instead of dating a variety of attractive women, he's obsessed with some snarky, unremarkable, bland self-insert. When women write men, especially in the context of romance, they often portray the man as someone whose sole goal is to date the protagonist, even when he has everything going for him and should clearly have interests that don't involve pursuing her. She becomes his only goal, and making money or running his company becomes secondary. Another way women tend to write men is to create their ideal man, who is emotionally aware and picks up on hints, essentially just a woman with a beard. Often, when women write male characters who experience conflict, the characters behave like women might, saying rude things to each other and talking about each other behind their backs. Men would typically just confront the issue directly and either become friends or simply avoid each other afterward. Since you mentioned writing fantasy, one of my fantasy pet peeves is characters speaking like modern-day individuals in a medieval setting or having dialogue that could resemble a social media post, reflecting modern-day politics and sensibilities. I read Poppy War, and it was filled with that, making it a difficult read. Story 32. I never understood the male gaze in writing until I watched Outlander with my wife. Repeatedly, I was asking, why on earth would he do that? She said that's how she felt when we watched Transformers. Don't transform female characters into idealized versions of servants or saviors. Write them with the same depth as the other characters, and allow their character arcs to drive the story, not vice versa. Game of Thrones Seasons 1 to 6 is a great example. George R. Martin's writing of Cersei is amazing, one of my favorite characters. Seasons 7 and 8 are examples of what happens when less talented writing wins the day, when the needs of the plot override the characters.